want you to think about a time you had a tough conversation with someone who held different political views than your own. How did it go? I'll share my experience. I was at a party, and my body froze. Oh, we're going there. Okay. And then my mind started to get blurry as I started spewing facts I thought were relevant. And then anger just started to build up in my body. And then I walked away, never to engage on that topic with that person ever again. Sound familiar? We're not alone. According to a recent report by the Public Policy Forum, the #1 fear facing Canadians today is growing polarization. Yeah. More than climate change or growing inequities, it's growing political and ideological polarization. And as we gather today, just days before the American election, I think this should be a moment of pause for all of us. Because no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, the tension is real. According to a report in the New York Times, 42% of Americans believe that the opposition isn't just wrong, but evil. Evil. And that's why I believe we should all be talking about bridge building for democracy. Because at a time when we are more divided than ever, the real question is, how do we come back together? And so what do I mean when I say bridge building? I'll explain it through the lens of what I do. So yeah, I'm a facilitator. I help people have difficult conversations, explore similarities and differences, and find a way forward based on compromise and collaboration. Think like industry executives sitting together with Indigenous leaders, community members, and environmental nonprofits, listening, learning, and finding a better way forward. And what I love about my job is that there's a certain magic to facilitation. It's not like I can wave a wand and problems disappear, but sometimes when things go right, it feels like magic. Doors open that weren't previously there. Tense people soften. Politics fade, and humans appear. And I believe that this magic can do more than just help fix a tense meeting. I believe it can help fix democracy. So let's start with our politicians. Now, I'll be honest, I always vote, but I have kept my distance from politics. There's a shiny veneer to it that bothers me, and I saw it when I recently attended Question Period on Parliament Hill. I saw politicians talking over one another. I saw complex problems being distilled into the most simplistic of talking points. And I know it's a space for theatrics, but what I saw was disrespect. And did you know that according to the House of Commons, the actual space between the two benches, between the sitting government and opposition, is exactly 3.96 meters? Or rather, said to be equivalent the distance of 2 swords facing off. Yeah, conflict is baked into the architecture. And I spoke with many politicians at different levels, asking their opinions about bridge building for democracy. And 2 things stood out. Hyperpartisanship is increasing. Politicians who say the most outlandish things to just rev up their base are being rewarded with more attention. And, especially since the pandemic, the public has become, meaner to politicians as that trust erodes. And for some politicians, that fear about the public is real, as violent rhetoric is turning into real-world threats. And so, we're stuck in this vicious cycle where anger fuels anger, and where hurt people hurt people. So how do we get out? How would I reimagine how politicians behave and gather to support bridge building for democracy? A few suggestions. Now, isn't it funny that we actually don't see these two words together very often? Wise politicians? Like, why? Imagine our politicians as role models, helping Canadians show us how to have a hard conversation with people they disagree with. Imagine if constituents felt deeply heard. Imagine the trust that could be built. Now, stay with me, protocols aside, in this magical world, mine, but instead of these adversarial benches, politicians would sit in circle with the cameras off, at least sometimes. Sitting in circle is the best facilitation method for bringing up the wisdom of the group. And we say this often in my work. We often say, you have to slow down to speed up, because it's amazing at how efficient we all are after everyone has sat face to face, said the things they need to say, and listened deeply to one another. And this isn't new. Sitting in circle is the heart of Indigenous governance, and it has worked for time immemorial. This is so simple, but I would love to host a dinner party for politicians to gather, laugh, share stories about their communities, come together as humans first, politicians second. And it's actually an old facilitation trick. You always gather the night before of a big meeting, because it's in that informal yet intentional setting where people loosen up. Connections are formed, smoothing the way for the next day. And so I guess what I'm saying is, what if we demanded more from our politicians? More skilled dialogue, more bravery to have hard conversations, more wisdom. Or what if we demanded less? Less perfection, less certainty, less of that shiny veneer. What if we offered our politicians grace? Now, I want to shift from the politicians to the citizens, because if our leaders are divided, it's no wonder that we, the people, are too. And I had this career-defining moment a couple of years ago when I realized, what if I took the skills I use in the boardroom to the dining room table? And I practiced. It was a couple years ago, February 2022. Some of you may recall, there was a truck convoy happening on Parliament Hill. And for me to just practice, dip my toes, practice about what is bridge building, I decided to have conversations with people who were both for and against the convoy. 1-hour Zoom calls with strangers, but the purpose was simple: listen. Don't try and change anyone's mind. And guess what? No one hung up. No one yelled. Profound humanity showed up on those calls. And in one instance, a nurse on the COVID floor apologized to the unvaccinated woman, saying nobody should be subject to such cruel name-calling. It was revealing, but it was real. But how many of us actually engage in those hard conversations? I do this for a living, and I find it really hard to do with family and friends. We have grown so divided that especially our family gatherings, for many of us, it feels like a minefield with people and topics we try to avoid. We filter out perspectives we don't like, and social media algorithms do the same. And when we are confronted with an opinion we don't like, our instinct is to cut that person out, or again, just quietly back away. But what if we had the skills and the spaces to gather with people face to face, people who don't look like us, live like us, or vote like us? What if we have the skills to have courageous conversations? I offer some suggestions. Start with commonality. Whether it's desire for progress or shared love of your community, your favorite sports team, by starting with what unites us, it paves the way for deeper discussions. So even in our differences, we have a foundation of trust and understanding. My favorite, engage with warm curiosity. Instead of sharing your perspective first, stop. Invite the person to share their personal story, and then listen. Don't think about what you're going to say next. Don't think how wrong they are. Just listen. And then repeat back what you heard from their perspective just to make sure you got it right. Engaging with warm curiosity doesn't mean you agree. It is simply offering that rare opportunity for someone else to feel deeply heard. Play in the gray. Complex problems rarely have black and white solutions. It's in the nuance, the murky middle, the gray. That's where we learn, we test our assumptions, we grow. Play in the gray with your courageous conversations. Now, practicing courageous conversations will take practice, skills. It is only human nature to react the way I did, right? We fight, we freeze, we flee when faced with these big emotions and threats. But for us to be bridge builders, we have to humanize, not demonize. And hopefully, by doing that, we'll start to come back together. Now, I want to end with a quote from another facilitator who does work in conflict zones around the world. There are 3 ways out of conflict. You fight through force, you do nothing, or you talk it out. I don't know about you, I am terrified of that first option, lest we forget what fighting through force actually looks like. And doing nothing, it's no longer an option at this point. But bridge building is about that third option, offering the skills and the spaces for politicians and citizens to talk it out with wisdom and grace, and hopefully, those magical doors will open, leading us out of the many crises we face. So in the days and weeks ahead, I urge you, gather with people who don't look like you, live like you, vote like you, and start a courageous conversation. And know that this isn't magic. It's real. But it feels magical when we stop shouting and start listening. When we stop thinking about the other and we start thinking about our neighbors. That's where democracy thrives. Let's move forward together, one conversation at a time.